I am so excited to have a guest speaker with us today. This is my friend Tim Boyd. Some of you know him very, very well. For years, Tim was the lead pastor at Westside Christian Church in Bradenton, one of Ren Church's major supporting partners. Now, Tim works as the director of an organization called Guardian Angels of Southwest Florida, which actually works very closely with One More Child, which helps the foster families in our area. So it's kind of cool to see all that coming together. We've been doing a lot with foster families here in our area lately, which I think is very cool. It's a door that God has really opened for us as a church, which is really awesome to see. Such an important ministry. Tim is also very funny and up-and-coming stand-up comedian, and he has been traveling all over the country doing these comedy shows, which is incredibly cool to see how God has been using him. He's also a member of Ren Church's management team, and he's been a big supporter of Ren Church since before Jen and I even moved to this area. We had a meeting, and he was a big part of that stage of Renaissance Church. So please welcome Tim Boyd.
Yeah, I've been a part of Ren Church since Panera Bread in Orlando area. I don't remember exactly where it was. Lake Nona. I shouldn't, why didn't Thrive Church, why didn't I guess that? Okay. Yeah, so my name is Tim. I work with Guardian Angels of Southwest Florida, which works with One More Child. It could take an entire worship service to explain how we work together. I'm just going to say we're best friends. That's how that works. We get to raise money, and then One More Child does all the work. So it's awesome. Yeah. I am also a comedian, and I've been able to do a lot of fundraisers, which has been pretty fun, and I'm really, really funny. No, it's fun. It's fun to send texts to my older sister and my parents and say, hey, people are paying me to make jokes. And for them to go, that's unbelievable. All right. So here we are. So we'll be in, and by the way, the last time I was at Ren Church, this is like triple the attendance from the last time. And that wasn't sarcastic. I'm being serious. This is great. Yeah. As a matter of fact, my sermon this morning really, I think really speaks to us at this size of a group. Many times we can feel invisible. Like that, I think one of the worst things as a human being is to feel invisible. Not necessarily like a superpower invisible. Some of us would choose that, right? That'd be kind of neat. Would you rather be invisible or be able to fly, right? And then I guess there's some psychology test where they pick one of those and say, if you'd like to be invisible, it's because you're a liar and because you want to do devious things. And if you want to fly, you want to help people. It just was rough for me because I was listening to a podcast. I'm like, well, I think I'd like to be invisible. And they said that, and maybe fly, I guess. Maybe fly. Anyways, no, but one of the worst things that can happen to us is to feel like nobody sees us, nobody notices us, nobody cares about us. Well, that can't happen at Ren Church. That's a positive. That's a good positive. For instance, Frank, do you know and I've known Frank for a very long time, so that's why I can speak about Frank. And as a matter of fact, I'll bet you're watching Frank. So, hi. Okay. Like Frank, there's many churches, and I'm not getting into the other churches are better or worse or any of that kind of stuff. There are many churches where you're not going to say how Frank is doing at the beginning of the worship service. That's just not how that's going to work. Well, you do at Ren Church, so let's embrace what we are. That's awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And also awesome, Frank. Yeah. Okay. So if you're a follow-alonger, you don't have to be. We're in Genesis chapter 16. If you've been afraid to follow along before because you don't know where the books of the Bible are, it's the first book of the Bible. It'll be easy. Okay. But then also all the scripture is going to be on the screens too. So, okay. Genesis chapter 16. But first, I want to talk a little bit about one of our foster families. Now, we have these 6 large homes on our campus up in Palmetto, and each home has 6 bedrooms and 6.5 baths. And it's not a program. Families can move into them as long as they will foster 4 or more children. They do that because we found out a long time ago that when kids go into foster care, which if you didn't know, which you probably do, was Whitney here?
Last week?
Oh, last week. Yeah, so foster the family. So I don't have to say anything about it. It's a crisis here, a crisis. So in our homes, sibling groups. It'll keep brothers and sisters together when they go in the foster care system. So what happened at one of our homes about a year ago at this point, about a year ago, a little bit longer, about a year and a half ago, one of our foster families received a child into care, into their home, and the child was young, but the child only spoke Spanish. And of course, you may see where I'm going with this, that was a bit of a challenge because the foster parents only spoke English. All right, so the child was placed, and now that's, if you're like, well, it's terrible. Hey. The foster system, everybody's working really hard in it, okay? But so they placed them in a little child, and so in order to be able to communicate with this child, the foster father started, he's like, well, I'm gonna learn Spanish, right? Like, me gusta. Like, close? Okay, but like, that's great. So what he did is he turned the subtitles on the TV. So the TV would be on, if you have that many children in your home, that TV's on, he turned on the subtitles, so every time they would talk, they'd have the Spanish subtitles going on. And then he flipped it. Then he also, if you're wondering, did he learn Spanish that way? No, he also then signed up for a course, and he learned a little bit, un poco. What? Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you. But he learned a little bit of Spanish, enough so that he could be able to communicate somewhat on a very basic level with that child. Now, I cannot imagine, because I've never been in that situation before, what that would mean to that child to finally hear in this new home, because no child wants to go into foster care. First of all, the child did nothing wrong, and second, the child doesn't want to not be with mom and dad. That's just how that works. But so anyways, the child went in. I cannot imagine how great or how welcome or how seen that child would have felt at that moment, being able to understand what dad's saying somewhat. That's one of the worst things in the world, is to feel unseen, uncared for, unknown. Some of our worst memories go around that kind of stuff. If we think about the worst memories we have, many of them can be like, I just felt like nobody could hear me. I felt incredibly misunderstood. I felt like my family would have been fine if I wasn't there. I was unwelcome, even though I was there. Now, if I got too close to home, don't worry. These are all my examples, okay? But those times where I feel seen. William Timaeus said, you don't really understand human nature unless you know why a child on a merry-go-round will wave at his or her parents every time around, and why his or her parents will always wave back. And if grandpa and grandma there, they'll do this. Why do we need, he says, why do we need to be seen? Why do we long for a God who sees us? And what difference does that make to us? He says it makes all the difference in the world, because to be seen is to be significant. To be significant. It's to know, as it is to know our roots. Every one of us wants to be seen. We want to be a part of. We want to be known. We want to be cared for. There's a scripture in the Bible that I think teaches this one the best, and it's found in Genesis chapter 16, starting at verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, and if you're a big Bible scholar, it does turn into Sarah and Abraham later. Sometimes I say that because if you're like me, I get stuck on that. So if you're, okay, nobody did, so we're just going to keep going. All right. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. Is anybody picking up any problems so far? Like, come on. Now, with the backstory with that, if you don't know it, well, I don't know why I said that. Who cares if you know it or not? It's fine. But with the backstory, God had promised them, an angel of the Lord had promised them 25 years before, or so, 20-ish years before, that they were going to have a child. And they didn't for a very long time. Very long time. Now, when my wife and I got married, my wife decided we were going to have kids. And so we decided we're going to have kids, and we thought, because we had just been married, and at that point had been through basically no struggles in our entire lives, we decided, like, we're going to have kids, and then God just says, great, you want kids? I'll give them to you. Well, it didn't work out that way. it took us, and I know at this point I'm telling the story from a long time ago and I have 5 kids, so it's not sad, but it took us about 1.5 years to get pregnant, which during that time, I felt like forever. I remember it just felt so desperate. And then when we finally did get pregnant, we told everybody. And then my wife and I, we lost that first child. Miscarriage is what it's called, which I feel is a cold word for what it feels like. We lost that child. And a little bit later, we got pregnant again, and we named her Grace, because we knew at that point it's only by God's grace that anything can happen, anything good. 25 years. 25 years they struggled and wondered. And so, of course, like we do as humans, and maybe none of us would go to this length, but let's not pretend that we don't sometimes go, well, God said it's going to happen. It hasn't happened, so let's make it happen. Right? And that always goes great, doesn't it, Carmen? Not you laughed, not saying that I've seen you do it, yeah. But no, but that's that idea of like, I'm going to work as hard as I can. We're going to make this happen. Let's go do it. And God is, whoa. I didn't say that. And so what happens, they make an absolute mess of what's going on. An absolute mess. It picks up here. Verse 3. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar, gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar. I hope we're reading between the lines here. And she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress, which would be Sarai. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible. Which I would go back and say, you know what? Yeah, Abram, you could have said, oh, no, we shouldn't do that. Sarai said, you are responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands, Abram says. Once again, Abram doesn't step up and try to help out at all. He goes, well, do with her what you want. Well, that's actually exactly what he said. Do with her whatever you think best. So Sarai mistreated Hagar. So she, Hagar, fled from Sarai. Notice what's missing in that story. Anything about Hagar having any choices whatsoever. Nobody's thinking about Hagar. Nobody's caring about Hagar. So I would pose to you, and I'm not going to make a big theological point about this, but I'm going to say this may be the most desperate situation of a person in the Bible. Might be the loneliest someone could feel, and I'm not. If you have a disagreement with that, Aaron would love to talk to you with it. Right. But I'd say, I'm not saying the most, but one of the most. Like, I cannot imagine in life a more desperate situation than a woman who is a slave who, don't want to use bad words here, a woman who is a slave who didn't have a choice in the matter of becoming pregnant, who then is about ready to have a child. I can't imagine a worse, more desperate, unseen situation. Nobody watching for her, nobody looking out for her. She leaves, and what happens is there's probably rejoicing. Oh, good, problem gone. I don't have to worry about it anymore. Desperate. That is something that maybe not specifically that story, but you can relate to. That may be a big thing that you remember from the past. It may be a smaller thing you're going through right now. It may be a huge thing you're going through right now. But I think every one of us can relate to that idea of there are times when I have just felt like, who's watching out for me? When my wife and I were living, okay, that's for me, not you. If I don't do this, you all go, hey, it's long enough. Okay? So when my wife and I were living in Omaha, Nebraska, there was a young lady who was, I was working in the office at the church. There was a young lady, there's several of us at the church, a young lady who was volunteering a couple times a week, and she would sit in this desk kind of in the middle space. So we'd walk by all the time. Very, very quiet. Every day I would say, hi, because that's me. And every day she would go, hi, because that's her. And one day as I was walking by, I noticed that she was crying. And being a man, I went, oh no. And I called my wife. I'm not, this is serious, right? I called my wife and said, hey, the young lady that volunteers here, because we had known her somewhat, like, she's crying at her desk. I don't know what to do. So at that time, my wife, back in the olden days, she was a stay-at-home mom. Oh, wow. I made so little money and we had so much stuff and less kids. But anyways, so my wife was able to come, as blessings, was able to come that day and start talking to that young lady. And so if you don't know my wife can be described as, what's the pushy? So my wife, but in a good way, my wife is talking to her and she's like, so what's going on? She's like, well, I don't really know what to do. I'm thinking of moving to San Diego. Like, oh, okay. She goes, but I might move back in with my parents. Actually, I'm thinking of getting an apartment with a friend. And it was enough that my wife was like, why don't you just move in with us? Which at that time was a great idea. We had one bathroom. Why not add another lady to our house, right? So anyway, so she moves in with us. She takes the basement that we had just finished off. She takes the basement. She lives with us for about a year and a half. My wife that whole time was like, you can live with us. And actually, you're gonna live with us. And but she also had an eating disorder. And so my wife said, but I'm gonna make you eat and I'm gonna watch you eat. And so she ate she drank Dr. Pepper and ate Cheez-Its. That was her diet. And then my wife would watch her eat chicken and stuff like that. And so over the course of time, it got to the point where she found a roommate, moved in with the roommate, and things are good. I'll just tell you right now, she right now is married. Her husband is an awesome guy, makes an unbelievable amount of money doing I don't know what. They have a great house. They have 2 little girls that are the cutest things. Everything's going great. Well, what we found out after she moved out, she wrote a letter to our family, to my wife, and in the letter it said, thank you so much for taking me in all that time ago. That night I was going to go end my life. We, as people living in this world, can feel alone, like there's nobody. All right, we can have a bill come in. I've been graced with having plumbers come to my house quite a bit recently. And one just said, I'd like to see you less, Tim. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna dig up your concrete floor and take out the old pipe and put in a new one. And I said, that sounds awesome. Yeah. And he said, you know it's gonna cost you money. And I said, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. And so just the faith of, hey, you're seeing this, right? Okay, we just need help. So it could be something as small as that or as big as before. She feels unseen. Well, here's the turn in the story, and of course, without this part in the story, it wouldn't be in the Bible. Here's the turn of the story, verse 7. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. The angel of the Lord was doing for Hagar what nobody else had done. The angel of the Lord was looking for Hagar. Now, there are those that would say the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament was a title for Jesus. I'm going to let your pastor deal with that one. But I'm not going to say I don't care, but either way, God looking for Hagar. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai. He knows her. That's an important part. He knows her name. He knows her title. He knows her situation. Where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord said to her, you are now pregnant and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Now, the first part of that feels great. The second part feels confusing at best, sad at worst. But when you're looking at that scripture, it's important that the way that we read the Bible, it's important that we don't view ourselves as the main subject of the stories, right? That's an important part. If I view myself as the main subject of every story, because I'm going to look at this from my perspective, and I would be very disappointed if I were pregnant and in the desert. right? Okay, I'm making a joke to make it seem like that's how odd that would be, just so we know. Okay, I'm certain you can handle all those questions. But no, so what the angel of the Lord says. Now, here's the thing that we need to worry about. It's not what is my response to this. It's not what is your response. It's not what is America's response. It's not what is the world's response in 2023. It's who cares? Whose response is it? Hagar. Hagar. How does Hagar respond to this? Because God was looking for an angel of the Lord was looking for who? Hagar. Here's Hagar's response. Verse 13. She gave this name. This is the very next verse. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. In the Bible, there is one person that gives a name to God. All the other names of God that we know, God told us. One person, and it's an Egyptian slave who was thrown away and pushed out. And she gives a name. And the thing that she notices, the thing that she cares the most out of this, out of a situation so desperate, I can't really relate to it. The thing that she sees, and she calls him, is you are the God who sees me. No matter how desperate our situations, there really is a God who sees us. And it's not just who notices us or who is aware of us, a God who sees us. Verse 14. That is why the well, there's a well there, was called Bir Lahai Chro. I don't know. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son that she had born. And if you're wondering, Bir Lahai Ro, whatever, that stands for the well of the God who sees me. God sees you. Do you take comfort in knowing that God sees you? Psalm 139:16. Before I formed you, I saw you. Before I formed you, I saw you. My eyes saw your unformed body. God has seen us before anyone else has seen us. What does it mean to be seen by God? It means someone is there. It means we're not alone. It means we're important to someone. It means we matter. But we live in a world of social media. And it's so funny that, not funny, it's sad. It's so opposite that social media, we now have, I'm looking around and many of us can remember pre-social media. Pre-internet, right? Yeah. I'm not gonna make any jokes about pre-black and white TV. Okay, sorry. I didn't say I was a good comedian, I said I was a comedian. Okay, no, but pre-social media, pre-internet, like how you saw pictures, like we're just about to that time in the year when you would see pictures of family. It was the Christmas card. Remember that? The old Christmas card. No, we still send them sometimes, but it was the Christmas card. Sometimes you go to JCPenney's or whatever, you get the pictures taken and it would go out. And I remember in high school looking at those, seeing what people look like now a year later. Now we can be seen as much as, we're being seen on the internet right now. We can be seen as much as we want. Actually, we can be seen more than we want. But yet I would say, and I think most of us would agree, not all of us, we are less known than we've ever been. Because we can now create a facade, this mask that we live behind, not just in person, but everywhere now. And so we don't have to be seen if we choose not to be, or we can get lost in a world of trying to be seen. I don't know if you've noticed this before, but I've noticed, and it's something my wife and I talk about, it's not a study that's been done, but there are times when you see people's social media change. Like they go from posting a little bit to a lot, or a lot to a little bit, and oftentimes that kind of triggers a response in you to go, I should reach out to them, right? They must not feel seen, to use our current vernacular here. Like, they must not feel seen, like we got to reach out. We've never been more seen, but yet we're less seen. Psalm 33:13 through 15. From heaven the Lord looks down and sees all mankind. From his dwelling place he watches all who live on earth. He who forms the hearts of all, who considers everything they do. Please leave that up for a second. So that last part, who considers everything they do. So you've got the scripture where it says, God's looking down at us from heaven, from his dwelling place, and he sees us. It's that important word. He sees all mankind. He watches all of us who live on earth, but it doesn't stop there. This phrase right here, he who forms the hearts of all, so he sees us, right? He sees the inner part of us. He sees all of us. And then this phrase, who considers everything they do? The who, of course, referring back to God. God considers everything they do. Now, in the original language, that phrase would be bin maseh, considers everything they do. Considers, understands, knows everything they do, understands everything they do. That everything they do would be maseh, which could also be translated as work, woven, or construction. The depth that comes from the original language sounds like this. It really looks like it's saying that God sees the project that you're working on in your life. God sees what you are constructing in life, and he understands what it means to you. Now, don't misinterpret that it's saying that God sees what you're doing and he's like, great, keep doing it. No. God still has a standard, and we're still to live to that standard and to search for what he's doing. But he sees what we're doing. Now, why do I take heart in that? Because I screw up a lot of times. I will say things that aren't right. I will think things that aren't right. Like I sometimes I will screw up on purpose, which you can't really call screw up, but that's what I still call it, all right? I will do that on purpose. There are times I do it by accident. But God sees me. He knows when I feel guilty. He knows when I feel bad. He knows when I feel great. He knows when I feel arrogant. He knows when I'm trying. Right? There's a difference. He won't watch this, so I can speak candidly about my 7th grade son. He's smart. He's currently failing a couple classes. Oh, my son. So what's happening in school is he's in there and he's not turning his stuff in. Anybody ever seen this? Yourself or your children or grandchildren or parent? I don't know what. He's not turning his stuff in. Like you would have an A or a B, and I keep telling him every single day when I pick him up from school, he asks me, hey, am I ungrounded? And every day I have to come back with the same, well, that's up to you. Mom and I don't want you to be grounded. We don't want you to be grounded. We want you to hand your stuff in. But if you don't hand your stuff in, we have to ground you. That's how that works. We took away, my wife and I are talking, what do we take away next? Like, you can't wear shoes anymore? We took everything. All right. Sorry. Here's why I told you the story about my son. Sorry. If he's trying and getting D's, it's different. It's different than if he's not trying and getting B's. It's different. I didn't hand any of my stuff in, but I aced all the tests. That's a dangerous precedent. However, if you can keep that up, go for it, but that's dangerous, right? So God sees our hearts. God sees, so when we're here at church on Sunday, every one of us, God sees what we're doing. He sees it. We're not alone. I shared that at Westside years ago, a long time ago, and there was a lady at the first service who sat in the back, and she had raised her kids and her grandkids, and she was currently raising her great-grandkids. She's passed away since then, and her mansion in heaven is huge, but she was raising her great-grandkids because people were making whatever. And I said, God sees everything that you do, even if nobody else sees it. And in the back, I could see her. And do I have to say she was tough? Right? Raising generations, she's tough. Tears coming down her eyes, just that realization, God sees everything I'm working on and what I'm doing. And we may not feel that in this life, but what a reward it will be knowing for all time that we've done this. God considers everything that we've done. When you feel invisible, God sees you. You may be in a situation like Hagar was, where it feels 100% hopeless. That night, when a couple weeks ago, when he said it's going to be $7,000 to $10,000 to rip up your floor, my wife and I felt, hopeless. We laughed. Because when he said 7 to 10, it's not going to be 7 to 10. Feel hopeless. Hopeless. A day later, we found out, a day later, my dad reached out and said he's giving us money. A week later, my wife found out that the school district, she's a teacher in the school district, that the school district, for some reason, they were getting some type of bonus or something like that. It just, all the weird, you're like, what in the world is happening here? And that's, compared to most things in our lives, a bill for plumbing is not it can be rough, but there's much worse things that we go through. So you may feel hopeless. With God, we are never hopeless. God sees you when you feel hopeless. God sees you if you're running away. God sees you when you feel invisible. And so what do? We see the invisible people around us. From the very, very popular Center for Disease Control. That's as far as I'm going with that. But anyways, statistics. Social isolation significantly increased a person's risk of premature death from all causes. Loneliness. But that's also one of the things you're like, yeah, I can see that. Social isolation was associated with about a 50% increased risk of dementia. Poor social relationships, characterized by social isolation or loneliness, was associated with a 29% increased risk of heart disease and a 32% increased risk of stroke. Loneliness was associated with a higher rate of depression, anxiety, and suicide. Loneliness among heart failure patients was associated with a nearly 4 times increased risk of death. We need to see the invisible people, right? Our takeaway today is God sees us in every situation. God sees us. And then the application from that is God calls us to see others too. God calls us to see others. Now, at this time, sometimes when I go to churches, this is where I tell people they could be foster parents if they wanted to be. And here's what I say. If God is calling you into foster care, you ought to do it. If God is not calling you into foster care, don't do it. For many of us, we get overwhelmed with this idea that we got to see all the invisible people. No, you don't. No, I don't. No, we don't. We just need to see the invisible person that God is asking us to see. And God is generally abundantly clear when it comes to communicating with us. You may need to hear this today. You are not Jesus. You are not the Savior of the world. You don't have that power. If any of you feel like you are Jesus, I think you have counseling. Okay. But it's good to remember, I am a part. You are a part of God's kingdom. We are simply called to do our part. Maybe right now you're thinking of a person, you're like, I wonder if they feel invisible. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to text them, call them, or see them in a couple weeks or something like that. That's pretty much the only application I have. God sees you, whether or not you feel like it. God sees you.